Hello and welcome to this edition of the Raymond Sims Show on the Coliseum Sports Network. Today's episode is brought to you by Sims Coliseum, the most creative basketball blog on the internet. Today we highlight the top two teams in the NBA and the Golden State Warriors and the Atlanta Hawks, and we figure out just how for real these teams are, and whether or not their Friday matchup is a preview of this year's NBA Finals. And in the third act, we'll eulogize one of the greatest basketball coaches in all of the land. All that coming up next on the Raymond Sims Show. So without further ado, let's begin. It's inevitable over the course of an 82-game season that the two best teams, the best from each conference, are eventually going to face off in the regular season. And whenever they do, there's always going to be some sort of air of anticipation. And that's exactly what happened on Friday in Atlanta as the Golden State Warriors took on the Atlanta Hawks from Phillips Arena. Now, if you were to tell somebody in 2005 that the Golden State Warriors and the Atlanta Hawks were going to be a marquee matchup 10 years from now, or 10 years from then, they would look at you like you were insane. And alas, that is the case. You have the two best teams in the NBA in the Eastern and the Western Conference, and they went at it in the way that you would expect two of the top teams to go up against each other. And you can't help but think that this is definitely an NBA Finals preview. I know that a lot of people out there believe that to be the case. And I'll tell you what I think about the Atlanta Hawks in the next segment. But for now, I want to jump into the Golden State Warriors, who I definitely think are absolutely on a title run and well on their way to at least winning the Western Conference Championship. They're currently 40-9. They lost to Atlanta 124-116 in that game on Friday, but then they bounced back and beat New York to start off this week, this last week before the All-Star break. So now they're 40-9. And I said at the beginning of the season that I felt that the Warriors were going to come out of the West. They just, on paper, looked like the most together team, the team that had the most weapons, the team that had the best coaching, the team that had the best versatility, because there were just so many players that could do so many different things. And I wasn't wrong about that, especially in the West, where it's still very hard to get into the playoffs, but a matter of figuring out who's really competing for that title that picture seems to become a lot clearer. It's not as up in the air as it seemed before, at least not to me. The reason that I think the Warriors are well equipped for a championship is because, of course, outside of a few exceptions, there just seems to be a sort of formula that goes with a NBA championship contender, or more so an NBA champion, because I think a lot of finals runner-ups have been able to at least get to the finals even with large deficiencies, but once they face that other team from the other conference that has pretty much all of the tools, then that's when they're usually stopped. But in this case, I feel like the Warriors have their star, that's Steph Curry, so when things get rough, and, there's a lot of players that could probably do a lot of things for the Warriors, especially Klay Thompson, who I'll get to in a sec. But Steph Curry, he's going to be the one that you turn to when things get rough, and chances are Steph is more than willing to take over in the final minutes of the game to get his team to a victory. Then you have your second scorer, which is Klay Thompson. It could be a star in his own right, but he's kind of developing into that right now. So he's still kind of second banana. His stats would say otherwise, because he could definitely get hot, and he's been able to do a lot more than just be a scorer. But for now, you can consider him kind of a second scorer. I always find that to be very important. You need your star, and then if the star is being held down by the defense, and maybe the defense, it was able to game plan for him very well, you still need an auxiliary outlet to help the team at least get by until the star can get hot again. Klay Thompson is absolutely that. Then you have your front court presence, which can vary in a number of ways. In the case of the Warriors, they have size, and that size can score. So they have Andrew Bogut, David Lee, Maurice Spates, all players that are big guys that can pound in the paint, but at the same time, they can stretch out the floor a little bit and they can still score. So it definitely works for the Warriors in their favor as far as having a free-flowing offense when your bigs can also run up and down the floor without getting too tired and then can also score not just in the paint. And I say that it kind of varies because not every NBA champion has had some big, huge post presence. And in some cases, it's not always a bruising center. Sometimes it's just a really very, I'm losing the word here, very dangerous attacking threat, a very good slasher. So in the case of the Miami Heat, when they were really lacking a inside presence and they really only had Chris Anderson and Chris Bosh, well, you still had LeBron James, who's more than capable of just driving inside and it being hard for teams to stop, or he's able to post up, or he would be able to get in and rebound when you need him the most. So the front court presence idea varies, but it's always preferable that you have size, and that's what the Warriors have. And then, of course, you got to have role players. And, I mean, they have those in bunches. Sean Livingston, who's found a role with the Warriors pretty easily. Andre Iguodala, who's toned down his volume shooting from when he was with Philadelphia, and he's settled into a nice role. Harrison Barnes off the bench, Draymond Green. And then there's a number of other guys that are on the team as well that can jump in and play, like a limited role. Justin Holiday, I like him and his athleticism. And then Leandro Barbosa, who at 32 is still as fast as he ever was, which is just amazing in its own right. All those things works for a championship team. They have the ingredients. Sure, there may be a team that that can game plan against them and probably stop all of those things. I mean, Memphis isn't a slouch. Dallas probably has parts of those same ingredients. So it's not like the Warriors are going to run away with it. But just as I felt at the beginning of the year, I feel like the Warriors have the most to bring to the table in terms of a championship contender. And then the key thing, of course, is that this is an up-tempo team. And usually it's very easy to dismiss an up-tempo team because, sure, you can run up and down the floor all you want, and that's fun during the regular season, and you get a bunch of fast breaks and lobs, and you're on Sports Center a lot. But once things slow down in the playoffs and you need to get into your half-court offense, you need to know what you're doing. And you need to be able to hunker down in the playoffs and play defense as well. Well, and when I say that, the first team that comes to mind for me every time is the 2007 Suns, because I was pulling for them. I thought that those teams were awesome with Steve Nash winning back-to-back MVPs, and I just thought that team was fun to watch. But once things really slowed down, they just weren't able to really defend as well as you would want a championship team to do. Well, the Warriors have defense, and it's the league's best defense. Per 100 possessions, one of these advanced stats. Per 100 possessions, the Golden State Warriors are giving up 101 points a game, essentially, or that's like their defensive rating. That's best in the league, which tells me something because in the early 2000s, there were tougher defensive teams that were only allowing about 98 points per 100 possessions. So the game's definitely sped up, but in terms of how the game is adapted, the Warriors are still head and shoulders above the rest of the league in terms of defense. So they're scoring at the second highest rate. I don't remember who's number one, probably the Clippers. And then they're number one in defense per 100 possessions. So when you have a potent offense and you have all your ingredients in terms of player personnel for a championship contender, and then you're not just playing good defense, but you're playing the best defense per 100 possessions, well, you can't help but assume that this team is going to be there in June. Who's going to join them from the East? Well, that's a much more open discussion to have. It's truly amazing what the Atlanta Hawks have been able to do this season. For me, they are definitely a surprise team. I know a lot of basketball writers that I was reading picked the Atlanta Hawks as a dark horse team, and for good reason, and we especially see that now. But I did admittedly kind of push them to the side. I mean, I understand how good of a coach Mike Budenholzer is, but I figured that it was just going to take more time for this team to develop into what they could be, which in this case is the best team in the East in the regular season and well on their way to possibly contending for the Eastern Conference Championship for years to come. And it's funny that the Hawks have been able to turn around so quickly in the second year under Mike Budenholzer, because I've been calling this team average since 2008 when they made the playoffs. They've even last year when they gave Indiana problems, and I was pushing for them to beat Indiana because I like the Pacers. I dislike the Pacers so much, but even then, and then when they eventually did not finish off the job, they just seemed so like average. They were middle of the road. They were okay. They are what bad teams aspire to be, basically. And I didn't think that they were going to be able to turn the corner as quickly. Like I'd give it a couple of years. Like I knew that a guy who's been working under a great coach like Greg Popovich for so long and was really actually an integral part of helping the Spurs be what they are since 1996 was going to do well eventually. But for them to have turned the corner now has really been a sight to see. And you can't help but think that this team is for real, at least in terms of competing for an Eastern Conference championship. Everything is just running so well for this squad. They move the ball fluidly. They all are just playing together as a team. There's just a number of contributors. The only real difference between the Atlanta Hawks and what the Spurs have been running for so long is that the Hawks are more reliant on the three for good reason when you have just about the entire team capable of at least standing out along the perimeter, but they're all capable of hitting three-point shots. I mean, heck, in that Friday game, you had Kent Bazemore just being a corner specialist. No matter how much the Warriors' top of the league defense tried, somebody would penetrate and then they would kick out. And hey, there's Kent Bazemore out there on the corner by himself, and he'd spot up and hit it. And that's not even counting Kyle Korver, who is becoming one of the best shooters of all time. And he's a Creighton guy, which means something for me being from Omaha. It's a Creighton boy right there, even though he's from Iowa. But it's just really amazing to see these players really come together. We all knew that each player on their own individual merits had talent. I mean, you had Al Horford, who all along for the Hawks, since he was drafted and he was there and he was dealing with injuries, everybody knew that Al Horford just being there was a key to having the Hawks being a contender in the East. And that was really just, if the Hawks wanted to get to one of the top four seeds, wanted to win the Southeast Division, you needed Al Horford to be there. And this is just exceeding that. And when people would complain that the Hawks don't have stars, coming in, I was like, wait, Al Horford's the star, right? He's the face, right? And you look at the stats, and he's not even the leading scorer or leading rebounder on the team. The leading rebounder, oddly enough, is Paul Millsap, which I guess isn't odd. We've known his skill set for a long time. But the man is 6'8". He's 6'8" playing power forward. And I guess that's right on the fringe of how tall a power forward is. And they fudge heights in the NBA all the time. But if his 6'8" height is true, compared to the 6'9" and 6'10" and even 6'11" power forwards that you have out there, he's 6'8" and he's averaging 8 rebounds a game. How are you shorter than everybody and pulling down all the boards? That's Barkley-esque. I don't know where his stats stand at the moment in terms of comparing him to Barkley, who was actually even shorter. But it's just really amazing that Paul Millsap can do that. And people laud him for his talent, but nobody's freaking out like I am that he is as short as he is and relatively short. I mean, he's 6'8". He could probably not walk through our doors here at the Coliseum headquarters without ducking. but relatively short, and he's still able to just produce so much for the Atlanta Hawks. And then, of course, there's Jeff Teague, who's just developing into a great point guard. He's inching his way up into the top pantheon of point guards today. So it's really just amazing to see those three. That's really like kind of the big three, in my opinion, for the Atlanta Hawks coming together and leading this team in addition to the role players. But if you go back to the formula that I referred to in the first segment, you have a star, you have a second scorer, you have a front court presence, you have role players. It's kind of, there's stuff missing. Now, as I said before, there's always been exceptions in terms of, one, the teams that actually get to the finals just as finalists. And then two, there's been a couple of exceptions in terms of which teams win championships. So it's not like it's set in stone. It's just that if you are trying to forecast who a championship team is going to be, these are the things, and the things that I referred to in the first segment, these are the things that usually get you there. Just for instance, in terms of exceptions, I'll go ahead and name the ones that keep floating in my mind since I've been alive. The Rockets, which is one of those teams that they had a star, and they didn't really have a second scorer. It was just a star and role players that worked for them. And then, of course, the Pistons, who didn't have a star, and just everybody was a team, and it worked out for them wonderfully. Like, there was no one set star. Everyone worked together, and that would really be the approach that the Hawks would probably take, because they don't have a star. They have great players in Millsap, Horford, and Teague. That's a great trio. But all three of those guys on their own would probably be a second scorer on a championship team. Then you have front court presence. A lot of people are questioning the size of the Atlanta Hawks. And I mean, just in terms of sheer number of big bodies on the roster, I think they stack up with everybody else. I mean, you got Pero Antic, you have Al Horford, you have Mike Muscala. So they have somebody else too. I can't think of off the top of my head. But like in point of sheer numbers of big bodies, they have size. But you're not getting a lot of production out of it. You're not getting a lot of versatility out of it. You have Horford. And then you have Antic, who can stretch the floor a little bit. But I remember him from last playoffs, and I haven't really caught too much of Antic on the floor for the Hawks this season. But he doesn't strike me as somebody who can really give you some points up front. And then, like I said, with the example of the Heat, where they didn't have a big body, but they had a huge slashing threat in Wade and James, Teague can drive the lane for sure, and that's it. It's not like a next level slashing threat. So the front court presence is kind of lacking, really, unless you just want to put all your chips on Horford. Millsap, like I said, pulls down all the boards, but he's not the biggest guy in the world. So I may be freaking out that he's 6'8", averaging 8 boards against other power forwards in the league that are bigger, not stronger. Millsap's a pretty strong guy, but we'll see how that plays out once we get to the playoffs. If Millsap can really cut through, or if he'll be swallowed up against the type of playoff power forwards that he'll face. And then also keep in mind that even if Millsap and Horford are your front court presence, you still need somebody on the bench, and Antic doesn't apparently seem to serve that role, as I stated before. The role players are there, that's for sure. Korver, Bazemore, Damari Carroll. The role players are there. If there is one thing on the 4 things I listed off, they got role players in spades, and that's for a bench that may not be all that deep, because Elton Brand, you don't know what you're going to get out of him. He's really only played 15 games this year. John Jenkins doesn't seem to be a guy that's working out. Thabo Sefolosha can probably still play D very well, but the shot isn't there like it used to be. But just in terms of the role players that are doing well, they're there. So that's at least one thing that you don't have to worry about. So, with all that being said, with them seeming to miss a lot of the key ingredients that I feel, little old me, that you need for a playoff run, it makes me wonder how they'll stack up against other Eastern Conference teams that admittedly they're missing something in there too. But You have Cleveland, who's starting to figure things out, because that's kind of the thing for Eastern Conference fans that they were worried about. When are the Cavs going to figure things out? Because once the Cavs figure things out, and that is, start winning games again, which they have in spades coming into the All-Star break, that's when the window shuts, essentially, for everybody else, at least in the popular opinion. I'm sure the Hawks would not agree with that. My finals prediction was Bulls and Warriors, and the Bulls are making me look very stupid right now. I'm very frustrated with them right now as a Bulls fan, but I still kind of hang on hope, because I think part of the problem is that they play down to opponents. Yeah, you can't play down to opponents in the playoffs, so perhaps maybe they'll be able to step up once they get to the playoffs, but that's a huge if. I think the only real threats right now to the Hawks are the Cavs and the Raptors, who are top 4 in the conference. But I haven't watched, and I gotta admit, I haven't watched enough Raptors to really have an opinion on them. I do admittedly overlook them. So if you're a Canadian or you're a Raptors fan, you can direct all your anger to me in the comments, and I'll be fine with that. But I'll be sure to check out more Raptors to see if they can really hold up against the East and maybe come out with it. I think the Wizards probably could have something to say too, but I don't know. I feel like they have some deficiencies themselves. In this last segment here, I just want to delve into the ranks of college basketball. Coming into Sunday, I was really wondering, what was I going to talk about? There was, of course, Kentucky staying undefeated. There was Duke just throttling Notre Dame, and kind of how they've gotten by without Rasheed Suleiman, or how they moved on without Rasheed Suleiman. I'll probably write about that this week, just if they're really a different team without him, and kind of the effect that his removal has had on Duke. But instead, I'm going to talk about a team on the other side of town from Duke in North Carolina who experienced another huge loss in their Tar Heel family. Of course, it was the great coach Dean Smith, who was just a great motivator, a great innovator in the game of basketball, not just for North Carolina, but pretty much for just the entire game, passing away over the weekend. And I know it was particularly a rough time at North Carolina, considering that they already lost another great Tar Heel in Stuart Scott, who passed away while we were still on hiatus. So I'll just say that, Stuart Scott really changed the game for sportscasters, particularly black sportscasters, and I'm grateful to him for that. And he's sorely missed. So now you have another great in Dean Smith, who has passed on, who's just done so much for so many different people, both players and coaches and just fans who were able to enjoy a lot of the victories that he had and the championship runs he's had, and then all what he's done for the game of basketball. I will admit my college basketball knowledge only goes back so far to about the year 2000, I'll say, when I really started sitting down and watching college basketball games. So I missed out on just witnessing what Dean Smith had done for North Carolina. But of course, his impact was much bigger, and you would see it in all the pros that were in the NBA that came through him. You would see it in all of the coaches that were all over the coaching ranks and still are to this day. And you would see it in a lot of the small stuff. Just looking at some of the stuff that he had his teams do that is carried on is really interesting, because you never think about it. For instance, like putting up a tired signal when the players are tired and need to sit out, or when you make a shot, you point to the guy who threw the assist to you, or the whole concept of senior day, or changing defenses in game, or double teaming on a screen and roll, so basically hedging those screens. Just concepts that you see every day in the game now. He was the one who pretty much was the originator. And to go back to that senior day thing, I really love the story that I heard where there was one year he had 6 seniors. So he put all of them out for the starting lineup, and he refused to take the 6 guys out because he wanted them all to get the recognition and to get the start. And so he just took a technical foul because he had 6 guys on the floor. I thought that was really great. But that kind of, it just extends to the type of person that a lot of people saw him as. He did a lot of things for a lot of people. Of course, he has the whole Carolina family concept where everybody who's been a Tar Heel, they're always a Tar Heel. and all of them should help each other out. Of course, he was the one to bring in Charlie Scott and pretty much integrate the ACC at a time when, of course, that wasn't looked highly upon. And it was particularly interesting for two reasons. One, his father apparently did the same thing in the 30s, where the high school that his father coached at, he integrated that. And then also Dean Smith did it at a time where he wasn't just big Dean Smith, the big coach at Carolina. He was just a guy who was coaching the Tar Heels in Chapel Hill, and he still chose to do it. It wasn't like he was using clout. He didn't make a big deal about it. So that's really something. And he was apparently just a really progressive guy and who did things, for civil rights and stuff like that during the 60s. So that's just really interesting to see that he did that. And I think that it's cool that there's so many people that are just lining up to say a whole bunch of great things about him and all that he's done for them on a personal level, whether it was just talking to them, or they played for him, or they coached with him, or they were a manager, graduate manager with them. It's really great when you can just have so many people say great things about you, about your legacy. And there's only probably a handful of coaches who could have that ability. And Dean Smith is one of them. And the most interesting thing about it all is that for all of the good things that people are saying about him, a lot of them aren't even mentioning, like, the wins aren't the first thing that come to mind. Like the wins aren't the first thing that come up. It's the fact that he helped these people on a personal level to want them to be better people, to be better citizens of the world. And it's like, oh, right, he did coach 879 wins. So that's really just a statement on the legacy that Dean Smith has left. And I'm sure that I am speaking for everybody when I say that somebody like Dean Smith will truly be missed. All right, guys, that's going to do it here for the Raymond Sims Show. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to leave a like. And if you want to keep up with future episodes, be sure to subscribe here to the Coliseum Sports Network so you won't miss a thing. You won't miss out on any of the other stuff that I'm looking to do here on this channel. If you have any comments on any of the stuff that I covered, who do you think is going to come out of the East and the West in the NBA? Do you have any feelings about Dean Smith and the legacy that he left as a coach? Be sure to leave a comment down below in the comment box. Or if you want to have this conversation go past YouTube, you can follow me on social media. I'm at Sims Coliseum on Twitter. You can like the Sims Coliseum Facebook page. And then if you're into the mini blog route, you can catch me on Tumblr. So I thank you guys for tuning in. Have a wonderful week, everybody.